And just for those that have joined us, I've gone ahead and started a recording, which will be kind of available after the session, just as we've done with our prior sessions. And it looks like people are still streaming in, so we'll give it another minute or so. Okay. Greetings, everybody. I think we can go ahead and get started. I think we have critical mass. My name is Robert Hawkins. I work at the World Bank. I'm our global lead for innovation and technology in education, and it's a pleasure to have all of you here with us for the next hour and a half to discuss kind of a cutting-edge theme on the role of blockchain in education. This is the third seminar in a series of 6. We've had 2 prior seminars that if you're new to this group, you can access through the links that were provided in the agenda and the invite. The first one kind of gave a broad overview of the technology itself, blockchain crypto and its potential impact on education. The next seminar that we did in April focused on crypto networks and ways in which the technology are bringing people together to facilitate collaboration and exchange of knowledge and value. And this one is the first one that really digs into, I think, the most well-known use case for use of blockchain, which is centered around the role of credentials, trusting credentials and the inherent value in those credentials. We'll come back in August, October, and December for the final 3 events in this series for this year, looking at building off of this event to look more deeply at the skills economy and the role in which the technology can facilitate value exchange in skills. The next event will be around assessment and ways in which we can kind of measure and assess the development of skills and the value of those skills. And then finally, we'll come together in December and look at the issues of token economics and consider ways in which technology can facilitate a broader exchange of value across an education ecosystem. So I'm very pleased to have all of you here today. I'd encourage you to use the chat very actively, to please put your name into the chat, your organization, just to introduce yourself. It's always good to kind of have a good idea of kind of who is on the call, and part of our objective here is to facilitate connections between people interested in the topic. Also, from the World Bank, the impetus of pulling this group together is to leverage all of your expertise and all of the interesting work that's happening outside of many of the countries that we work in, and that might be relevant to others working in this space. So again, we're trying to kind of leverage as much kind of knowledge and experience as possible. The schedule, I'll pass off soon to Chris, who will kind of introduce together with Carrie and Simone the kind of the context of this event, which is on learner-centered credentials, and kind of unpacked what each of those mean. We have 3 use cases that will be in a discussion format to learn about what 3 countries, Indonesia, Canada, and Colombia, are thinking about in terms of implementing learner-centered credentials. And then we'll have an open discussion. And please, again, put your questions into the chat, and I might cold call people as well, so be ready. And then we'll have some conclusions and next steps. So again, please use the chat, introduce yourself, and begin to put in any questions as they occur to you on this theme. But without any further ado, let me pass the floor to Chris, who will kind of set the stage for this event. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, welcome everyone. Just I want to double click that. I know it's a busy time for everybody, but glad you took some time to come join us. And as he said, we're building a bit of a pyramid of knowledge as we go through the series, and I think this is a really important piece of that, because as Robert said, the digital credential centered around the learner and the employee is really what changes everything, right? That it gives us the ability to start connecting and creating large-scale networks that can start to let us get to the heart of understanding what's happening with lifelong learning, right? So we can start to connect the systems that have been, up until now, just drastically disconnected. Schools don't talk with schools, don't talk with universities, don't talk with startups and enterprises and systems. And it's a small shift, but it's a big one, which is moving to a learner-centered a system or format that allows for us to start to connect all of those disparate systems into digital networks. And blockchain and other implementations allow for us to start to do that in a way that's not exploitive, that can actually protect the learner's data and the sovereignty of that data, and allow for us, as stakeholders in the supply chain of education and employment, to start to get at that data and understand what's happening to optimize our systems. And so it's a really exciting time. And and the great thing is there is a lot of work happening in this space. When you start thinking about these broad technologies, it's what at Learning Economy we like to call the Internet of Education. There are several different utilities that allow for us to bring about these learner-centered ecosystems and to localize those and also globalize those. But at the heart of it is digital credential networks that are learner-centered. And so this one really is very fundamental, and because it's fundamental and it acts as kind of a building block for the rest, there's great work happening. A lot of those utilities, there's a lot of blue sky and a lot of thinking about what could be, and a lot of nice pilots and things happening. But particularly in this space, this technology, these networks, they're starting to become robust. We're starting to work towards standards, so it's also not just bespoke technologies that are coming off of the of the startup pipeline, but we're actually moving to a place where we can create standards that allow for interoperability and that can continue well into the future to protect that learner-centered model. And so, I can't explain it nearly as good as our next speakers, so let me set them up and turn it over. Next we have Carrie Lemoy, who will be joining us to kind of lay the groundwork for what is all this about. And then Simone will be joining us to unpack that further. And many of you probably know them, and I'll let them kind of introduce themselves a bit. But I will say Carrie has been a fundamental piece here domestically for understanding the research. She helped with the U.S. Department of Ed to develop the first research and understanding what ecosystems are and why we need education ecosystems. And now she's working with W3C and with in so many different communities of practice, as well as over at Concentric Sky, who is in charge of Badger. So she is just a wealth of knowledge, and Simone as well. He has been building digital networks with his company Digitary for quite a while. But in addition to that, he is helping to lead up the IEEE work, which is another standard group that's helping to create kind of interoperability, if you will, between data standards. And it's absolutely thankless work. And so, but it's incredibly important work. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Carrie, and she can start to unpack why this is so important.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. So as Chris said, my name is Carrie Lemoy, and I'm the Director of Digital Credentials, Research and Innovation at Concentric Sky and for the Badger platform, which issues open badges. And I'm going to just give a shout out to the driver of my site, which I believe is Simone. So thank you, Simone. Before I get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been part of the Open Badges movement community since 2011, and I contribute to the original Open Badges specification way back when it was being incubated at the Mozilla Foundation. And now at Concentric Sky, I'm collaborating with the Open Badges Working Group at IMS Global and helping to lead the discussions with the Verifiable Credentials Education Task Force at W3C towards the next version, what we hope will be Open Badges 3.0, which we also hope will be native to verifiable credentials, which I'll get into later. I actually just completed my PhD in media psychology, and my dissertation was about the adoption of self-sovereign identity digital wallets. And what I'm going to do today is just sort of provide a high-level explanation about learner-centered credentials and how they work. and I will review what trust relationships mean in this context. I'll get into self-sovereign identity and its principles that underlie the learner-centric credentials, and then also go a little bit into the aspects of my research that's related to that, because it's relative to this discussion, I think. And then lastly, I'll explain a little bit about verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers and fill you in on the work that's happening at the VC Edu Task Force, W3C. Can I have the next slide, please? So first, I just want to talk a little bit about this like trusted system, right? So we have these learner-centered credentials, and it means that the learners are at the very center of a digital trust triangle with issuers and verifiers. And this is very different from how digital credentials have been working, because the trust is dependent on the technology, not the issuer of the credential. So in some ways, this trust triangle is actually closer to paper credentials. So for instance, with passports, the citizens request a passport from a government agency. And then in return, they get a paper booklet. And then when asked for proof of citizenship from a verifier, they can present the paperwork, and the verifier can tell whether it is trusted by the format of the passport and all the indicators within a passport. So the verifier doesn't need to call the issuer every time they get a passport. They trust what they see. But digital credentials didn't start this way. They've typically been hosted on the computers of the issuing organizations. And this means that the credentialed individuals and the verifiers are dependent on the issuers to be directly available and to be contacted to verify every presented credential. And so up until now, this has made the digital credential exchanges not as reliable or secure or private, because verifiers are very dependent on the issuers. But learner-centered credentials are not dependent on the issuers. And that's because a combination of technologies and data models that use cryptography to prove who issues and who controls the credentials. Verifiers can verify the data in credentials because it follows a format that they expect, and they can check the veracity of the credentials without contacting the issuer. So just like a paper passport, verifying software can examine a digital credential and make a decision about it. In education and workforce, this gives learners more agency and privacy because they have immediate access to their education and work history, and the queries about their history can be made privately and securely. Excuse me. And over time, they can collect data about themselves that could paint pictures of their identities to use however they wish. Next slide, please. So the basis of all of this is self-sovereign identity. And this mandates that individuals should be the rulers of their own identity. It's both a philosophy and a combination of technologies that work together to produce persistent, verifiable, understandable, and data-rich claims that provide individuals the ability to transact and share data about themselves privately. Can I go to the next slide, please? Underlying the self-sovereign identity, the basis of all of this is these principles. And shown here are 12 principles of self-sovereign identity that are being leaned on by any. And actually, these expand upon the original 10 principles to include more emphasis on equity and usability. And as you can see, these principles suggest that identity should be centered on individuals. And when we relay this concept back to education, it implies that while the issuers of credentials may provide the facilities and shared knowledge and have the records of the learning in their hands, it's the learners who have the control of these, like how they use these credentials. They have control over how they combine them and who they share them with. And this is because their learning and their work experience is part of their unique identities. So it's them who controls all of this. Okay, next slide, please. Self-sovereign identity has the potential to increase internet trust by shifting how humans digitally represent themselves and increase the amount of control they have over their personal data. And this could have reverberating effects across all online interactions. But it's unknown if this nascent technology, if it will be accepted or used at all. So the objective of my PhD thesis was to better understand the factors that may facilitate its adoption. And so as part of this, I wondered which of the original 10 principles of SSI related most to trustworthiness. So the participants in my study evaluated a webpage that described a self-sovereign digital identity wallet 10 years into the future. And then they answered questions about the wallet. And we can see here, highlighted on the left-hand side of this diagram, is that the results demonstrated that the two most important factors that contributed to their perception of trustworthiness was protection of data, and then persistent access to data. And for learner-centered credentials, these results indicate that the technologies that are being developed can contribute to this perceived trustworthiness and actually lead to adoption. Have the next slide, please, Simone. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier, that cryptography underlies all of these types of credentials, and that's what keeps the credentials private and secure. The type of cryptography that's being used is called public key cryptography. And how that works is every identity has a public and a private key that works together. So think of the public key as an address to your house, and the private key being the key that opens the door. So the address of your house is public, but no one can enter without your key. And then take this analogy and apply it to digital credentials, where your identity is a public key, and then a credential, like a degree, can be assigned to this public key. And then your private key that is paired with the public key proves that you have control over this credential. This is pretty much the fundamental aspect of this learner-centered credential technology. And what you'll see is that there's, this is like a foundational technology for both blockchain and credentials. Could I have on the next slide, please? So in terms of like access to data, with learner-centered credentials, learners can have immediate and persistent access to all of their learning and employment histories. And of course, this is critical for many populations of the world. And we don't want to have to rely on servers that might go down, or web servers where history may have changed and we don't know if the documents can be relied upon. And so in this case, with learner-centered credentials, credential data is stored where the learners can access it. This could be on their mobile devices, it could be on their computers, on cloud providers, or even with like other people that they trust. As long as the learner has the private keys for the credentials and the data can be proven to not have been tampered with, then it's verifiable. Then now, of course, you may be wondering, like, this is a discussion about blockchain. So when is she going to talk about blockchain? But honestly, learner-centered credentials don't even have to use blockchains. They don't require them. They could use them, but they don't need to. And two of the standards that sort of fuel this, that sort of could interact with blockchain but may not, are called verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers, which we often refer to as VCs and DIDs. So, next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly explain from a very high level how these work right now and how a flow might happen with a credential exchange. So VCs are digital documents that can be understood and verified by both humans and machines. And each document contains metadata that describes the type of credential, the digital methods of how it can be verified, and all of the parties involved. And DIDs are a new type of digital identity for the internet. They can be used on their own to identify people, organizations, or even things. But with verifiable credentials, they're often used to identify the issuers or the individuals or the learners. These are both standards that are being worked on at the W3C currently. And also there is another organization called the Decentralized Identity Foundation that is working on related standards and implementation. And just to take it back a little bit more into DIDs, a DID can be both like a unique identifier, but also it's a document that has metadata containing information about its validity and also the instructions on how it can be authenticated. And it's DIDs that are often using blockchains. They are the part that are being anchored in blockchain. So if a public key is registered at a point in time in a blockchain for a DID, and then that DID is using a credential, then that DID can be tied to the issuer and the identifier. And that's how the verification process works. So a flow for a learner credential could be something like this. So a learner provides an issuer with the DID, with their DID. And then the issuer creates and issues a verifiable credential that makes a claim about this learner using that learner's DID. And the VID also includes the issuer's DID and instructions for how the verifier can authenticate the issuer and the content of the VC. Then once the learner has their VC or many VCs, they can present one or more of them in something called a verifiable presentation to the verifier, who could follow the instructions inside each of the credentials in order to verify them. And then also be able to verify that the learner is the person presenting these credentials is the recipient of these credentials. So all of this, as you can see, is all based on cryptography, and there's no real interaction involved. All of the content inside the verifiable credentials could be human readable, though. And this is what will get interesting when we start talking about AI and machine learning and this content. And quite a bit of work is happening now with rich skill descriptors and the Open Skills Network, trying to figure out how do we start using common explanation of skills, so that we can start mapping these together and do very specific skills-based hiring, not just based on degrees. And then next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to let you all know some of this work that's happening now at the W3C. So I'm one of the co-chairs of the VC Edu Task Force. And this here is our, back one more, please. Thank you. This here is what we're working on right now. We're trying to bridge the ecosystem, the VC ecosystem, to what's already happening in education data standards. As we know globally, in the EU, US, and otherwise, there's many education data standards. So we are looking at all of them and trying to see how do they fit into this verifiable credential standard. And then we're also looking to help those who are doing pilots now and help to inform them how to do them. And of course, collecting all the use cases we can so that we can do this as properly as possible the first time around. Our main primary focus right now is working on single achievements. And we've been leaning on the Open Badges specification from IMS Global for that right now, because Open Badges can represent one single achievement of any type. And so we're looking at how does an Open Badges as a verifiable credential, how does that work? We're discussing that to inform the work that's happening at IMS Global. And then our next step will be to look at more complex credentials and when there's more than one achievement in there at a time. So that is my high level overview. And I'm here to answer any questions about it and help inform the use cases and help as best as I can.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. There was one question in the chat about, by Wesley from over at UNESCO, asking, from your research on SSI trustworthiness, do you see a role for governments and it changing? If so, in which direction?
Yeah, I didn't really go into governance very much here, right? Because this is one of the reasons why potentially that verifiers don't need to contact the issuers, because there is some concepts of like, what if a credential is revoked? Like, this is a very high level explanation. This gets pretty complicated very quickly when we start talking about true learner experiences and the interactions with verifiers, and employers, and institutions. My study was very, very, very high level. It was very much like, here's a web page and it describes what could happen if you have a wallet application with all of your verifiable credentials in it. And in this study, I did not actually ever say self-sovereign identity or blockchain. I just said, here's this concept. You have this wallet and you could have all of your health records and education records, and what will you do with this? And then I asked questions that were loosely, they were worded around self-sovereign identity principles without actually like saying what they were. So yeah, that's a really good question. Of course, the governments are going to issue these credentials. There's no doubt about it. Driver's license, passports, right? They are going to be issuing these. So and that's what we're going to see. And already I think we are seeing that. And I think that's what people related to first, like read to most first. Like typically I will talk about a driver's license when I'm discussing this, and people understand that. And they say, oh, great, it would work just like my driver's license, but it's on my phone. That's very useful. And so I think that's pretty much how that will start. And probably that will start sooner. More, we're all working on this in education, but I think, those types of IDs will happen pretty quick. I don't know, relatively speaking, right, Chris?
Yeah, healthcare is going to drive that big way. I mean, in truth, we're in education, but what's happening with the, vaccine credentials and such is going to really help to drive this. And, and from our perspective at Learning Economy, when it comes to governments, I mean, there's definitely a role. And there's it's not only is there a role for governments, but there's a real opportunity, right? And the less legacy the country has, the more the opportunity in many ways, right? Because, governments that can actually come in and set up, region-wide, local-wide, nationwide credential networks can actually pair that with, national identity and things along those lines as an anchor, and they can, start to create aggregates of credentials that start to bridge across, large ecosystems. And, that can be done organically with networks just coming together and forming. And in the United States, that's how it will have to happen, because things are very decentralized here, and there are lots of, different challenges. But in the places where there is less legacy, there's an incredible role for governments to come in and start creating these decentralized networks for credentials and issuing those broadly. And I think there's a real exciting opportunity for doing that, at least from our perspective. So yeah, great questions. I'd also love, knowing we need to keep with time as we move. We always run out at the end. Love to tee up Simone to just take us a little deeper into this. And I think you're muted, Simone.
Still muted, Simone.
Give me a sec.
There you go.
Am I still? Oh, okay, this is.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me, but you cannot see my slides, right?
Well, we could for a moment.
All right. Okay. I need to do just one.
I think maybe Carrie should present your slides, Simone.
Yes, Simone, I'm very sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Is it okay now?
We
There it
can
is.
see it.
All right.
All good.
So you can
There you
hear
go.
me and see the slides. Nice.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be in such a good company here of known colleagues and unknown future colleagues, possibly. I wanted to add a corollary on what Carrie said in something that could be expanded later on with the use cases. And starting with scan of a learner record. And just focusing on a couple of dimensions or attributes that are key, and some attitudes that we're seeing emerging when we talk about learner-centric records. The two characteristics are that these records are comprehensive, so they really span across the lifelong learning journey. No need to, I guess, dwell into it. And the second element is that they need to be interoperable. This is extremely important because, as it was mentioned by Chris and Carrie, the game here is to build out a global ecosystem. And so these credentials, learner records that could come in different forms of shape, need to be able to talk to each other, to be exchanged flawlessly. And they need to do that with a couple of traits. One is that these records need to be self-sovereign, so their own control. And we should approach this with a distributed attitude, meaning that we can recognize that there are many players issuing different kind of credentials, different contexts, that they should all be taken into account as we build out this ecosystem. So I'm really passionate about learner records, but there's one thing that I'm more passionate about, and that is to implement learner records at scale, at global scale. And this is what I've been able to do through the company that I work for, Digitary. We started in Europe, but our work is really extensive across different regions. Particularly in Australia, we're running a national scale platform called MyEquals. And in Canada, I'd like to call that out. My colleague Joanne will dwell into it more. The MyCreds network, which is emergent as we speak. So learner records at global scale. When we talk about principles and practices, I think it's important to find the nexus of the two. And the principles behind recognition, which is really a value, I would say a virtue that the technologies that we're talking about are building toward. It's this idea of global recognition where there are equity principles and accessibility principles embedded into it. And this is a policy that really emerged back in 2011, and it was driven by UNESCO and still very much drives the agenda. Now, while recognition was typically considered as a moral question between institutions, now we're getting more into this self-sovereign identity space where learner records become what I call learner gravitas. So we should really be show integrity in applying these technologies that allow these records to be self-sovereign, but change the behaviors and the mindset of the issuers and the verifiers and the receivers. This will take some time, and we're going through that transition. So I think this idea of really serving the learners and understanding their journey and following that journey is key. Those principles really, the one that Carrie talked about, not only go back 5 years with Christopher Allen bringing them up again, but if you look closely, they're also quite aligned with the Internet of Education principles, which are closer in time to us, but also to this very community. And I called out a few of them here that really speak to the importance of building tech that supports these principles. Some of the work that is happening around building out the ecosystem is really to provide the community with open standards. Carrie mentioned the W3C effort, which is greatly important, but just wanted to flag another initiative that I'm involved with as a chair of a working group within IEEE, where we're looking at this integrated learner record, where the I integrated could really be pivoted into interoperable, international, inclusive, and so on. So this is an ongoing process that really wants to shake hands with the other standard development organizations so that we're able to support this learner-centered ecosystem. Some of the key DNA traits of this initiative is that it is standing on the shoulders of giants, so it's informed by other work, the one that Carrie mentioned for sure. We are drilling down into the content of these educational credentials, also known as the payload. There are liaisons with other standardization bodies globally, and we definitely would like to have more international contributions from outside of North America. I am based in Italy. There is some contributions from Europe, but this is a call out to everyone here to join the effort and engage. And possibly lastly, a driving main point here is this is a journey that we are onboarding, and the technology will change, but the important thing is really to build bridges across the different eras of the internet. Currently, we have a lot of focus on the emerging technologies like blockchains, verifiable credentials, and so on. But to really build out these ecosystems at scale, we should look back and bridge with the existing eras of the internet so that we bring everyone on this journey and do not leave anyone behind. And this leave no one behind is really one of the key message of UNESCO's education policy as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at 2030 in how we could reshape idea and practices around higher education in a sustainable and accessible way. And UNESCO SDG 4, really incorporates some of the principles that we find in the Internet of Education principles, but also in other similar initiatives like the Groningen Declaration Network that some of you may be familiar with. So again, let's go out, build the ecosystem, but leave no one behind. And as a bonus track, I wanted to send a message and call out to be conscious, about the B word, B as for blockchain. So there is a bit of a trick. I mean, if you're looking at a possibility of implementing technology, try to ask whoever is talking to you to articulate the values of the proposition without ever mentioning the word blockchain. If they can strip away that word from the sentence and it still makes sense to you, I say go for it. Otherwise, ask a second question. And that's all I have for you today. Bob or Chris, back to you. I'm going to stop sharing right now.
Yeah, great, thank you. That was just, so insightful, both of you. I think everybody now has a broad context, and I think next we're going to start digging in on some use cases. But are there any questions before we kind of pivot and start actually focusing and looking at some of the work that's happening? Great. So yeah, Bob, you want to kick us off into some use cases?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we'll also have at the end of this next session opportunity for more open discussion and questions. So keeping track of your questions, put them into the chat, and we'll circle back. In this next session, thanks so much to our presenters. In this next session, we want to build off of some of these ideas and look at 3 use cases. And for these use cases, it'll be in a discussion format, and we want to delve a little bit deeper into how these countries are thinking about and defining, what is self-sovereign ID? What is the actual data that is being used? In terms of ownership of that ID, what is the technology in terms of the wallet? What is the custody of those private keys? How are they managing that? In terms of quality assurance, how are the governments looking at ensuring quality over the credentials and the issuers? How are they looking at standards? What are their challenges? So I'm teeing up kind of some of the questions we'll delve into deeper as we jump into these use cases. But without further ado, I want to introduce Iwan, who will give a little bit more details on himself and share what he's been working on in Indonesia. Iwan.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Hold on, I would like to share my screen in a moment. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we see.
Yeah, yes, all good.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to share what done here in Indonesia. It is still a long journey, and my name is Hemiwan Fatoni. You can call me Iwan, just like Bob. I currently work with an ADP project, an Asia Development Project with the Indonesia Cyber Education Institute that I will explain in a moment. So, first of all, ICE or Indonesia Cyber Education Institute, you can imagine just like a Coursera, EDX, or FutureLearn. So it is a consortium of 11 universities initiated by the Open University of Indonesia. And although it is a consortium, it will be established as a self-regulatory organization in the future. So we are now in the process to establish more contents. But I think the main discussion for this session is on the digital credential. So I will go into this picture. So it is a simplified diagram of the system. I think it's very similar what Carrie already explained as well, whereby the student will take the course, finish the course, and then the system will issue the certificate, notarize it in the blockchain, and then sell the credential to the student. Please note that the holder is the learner, whereby in this case is the student, and then can share it with the parties that he or she wants. And we will have the certificate verifier that everybody can verify the integrity of the credential. So that's pretty straightforward. I will not go deep into the technology. I think Carrie already explained it very well. And the next thing that I would like to explain is why it makes sense in the case of Indonesia. You can see that Coursera is there, EDX is there, FutureLearn is there. The difference is currently we are in Indonesia is having a wave of educational reform, whereby the student can take 1 or 2 semesters outside their study program, and it will be recognized as 20 to 40 credit points for the student. So it is very important, not only for the government, but also for the originating university to ensure that the credential is correct and the integrity is intact as being issued by the issuer. So that's very important, because this program in Indonesian language, we call it Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka, or the rough translation is on the freedom to learn and freedom to learn everywhere. So student in this case, in our case, is very much related with the exchange of student between university and the independent of the student to study using, for example, massive online course platform like us. But it is also possible that the student want to take off 1 or 2 semester working on the humanitarian project in the rural part of the country, and still what he or she did will be recognized as the credit points as part of his journey as a learning journey at the university. So that's very important that the policy explicitly mentioned that one of the criteria is to provide a verifiable professional certificate on the completion of the program. So that's the policy context in the case of Indonesia. And the case of the ICE Institute, as I mentioned before, it was bootstrapped by the Open University of Indonesia. The university has been in the market for, I think, 30 plus years. And moving to the online space is a natural evolution for any open university, including Indonesia. So that's the case for ICE Institute to jump into this space. And why is the blockchain-based credential? I tried to remove the B word as suggested by Simone, but unfortunately I cannot, but hopefully not so much. So why using this approach? Because it creates an excellent documentation or record of, we call it unbundled courses. If we look at most implementation, usually come up with, I took a course of marketing or statistic, and then it will be verified that I get an A or AB degree, something like that. And it can be verified anytime. It can share to the job market or other higher education institution in case of I want to go to continue my education, for example. However, this kind of approach also enable us to include more detailed competencies that come into the approach of micro-credential, for example, and also competencies obtained through online and regular courses everywhere. And in the case of continuous learning after the student graduates from the university, is the recognition of prior learning, which is very attractive for other stakeholders. In this case, is the job market, in the employers, because now they can put the the learning record of internal trainings, including those that is usually not covered by the university and traditional university, like the soft skills. So they can put it on that one. And the other interesting thing that we are going to let's call it experiment in the future is on the unbundling part. We have an example that we often use here in Indonesia. If we took a course of marketing and then I graduate with, let's say, a B, not the perfect A, but if we can record all of my achievement during that course, the prospective employee, or if I want to go to continue my study, can see that I'm very good at the basic, the fundamental of the marketing, and I'm very good at the marketing using the low budget or dealing with new culture, but I'm not good on marketing with the big budget, with the big bag, those kind of things. This is important then because the learner, when they enter the job market especially, then they can pursue their own path based on whatever they achieve during their journey. So that's the reason why we go to this path. So I think I'll stop at this point, Bob, because I think you want to have some kind of question and answer after this.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. So two fascinating pieces that I wanted to kind of follow up with you on quickly, and then we'll move to Joanne on Canada because she has to leave at noon. But I think it's fascinating that you are looking at how to open up learning outside of the university context, which gets into the question of quality assurance, of how do you vet these external providers of education. And I guess one question is there a vetting process, or what is the role of quality assurance of the universities? And then the cultural change within the university system to unbundle the courses and look at micro-credentials. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the political economy of how you've gone about beginning to unbundle these courses and any resistance that you've received from the universities.
Okay, and the first point, there is a vetting process. Actually, I provide the link on the slide, so you can go slides. Most of it is still in initial language, but it's pretty much clear on the vetting process. For example, if one of the item here is I can propose a program from a private sector, for example. I need to provide it's quite a rigorous process, and there's a vetting. I need to comply to several things and this and that. And government provide incentive on that one, because I can apply a budget as well to provide these courses from the university. I give you example that currently there are three global technology company, Google, Microsoft, and Apple that working on this one. So those three are proposing how we are going to, let's say, make the program on the AI using the cloud system. And it's very rigorous steps, including the syllabi and so on. And the government will review it, and they will involve the respective consortium. For example, it's related with engineering. It will be engineering consortium reviewing the quality. So that's on the quality part. And the second one is on the resistance. Yes, of course, there are resistance. And even I have to admit that up until this point, there are still some learning curve. There are some unanswered questions that so people are working on it, but basically everybody agreed that it is good for the country. This is good for the students. So it's learning in progress, and I think I saw less resistance nowadays compared to when this idea introduced last year.
Well, Iwan, as you go through that process, I think it'd be very valuable to everyone on this call if you can kind of document kind of your successes, how you've gone about convincing people, where you've run against brick walls, and how you've broken through those walls. And then some of the other points we're going to address in later seminars, particularly on kind of this issue of kind of how do you define the skills and the competencies that you want to develop, and then how do you measure those skills, and kind of moving from an institution provided credential to being able to assess the skills through the courses themselves, which is kind of an interesting challenge that we'll kind of, I think, unpack in the future sessions. Yep. So, Iwan, we're going to come back to you at the end of these cases, because I think there'll be more questions for you. But I want to go to Joanne from Canada to introduce herself. I know she only has till noon, but I think that's enough time to unpack the Canadian experience. So, Joanne, thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Okay, and just managed to secure some 15-minute breathing room, so I have a little bit more time if you want me to stay for a little bit to answer some questions.
We would love for you to stay as long as you can.
Okay, my name is Joanne Duklas. I am a former Registrar Assistant Vice President at one of Canada's largest universities, York University. I'm also a former president of the National Registrars Association, and I currently serve, along with many other hats, as the executive lead for an initiative called MyCreds MaCertif in Canada. And I just want to do a little bit of a check. Can you see my slide? Yes?
All good.
Okay, so with that particular initiative, and I'm a researcher and consultant in Canada, but my job as executive lead is to choreograph all the efforts of the good people that are coming together to create this new national network and series of wallets for our learners. I work closely with our wonderful service partner that Simone represents, Digitary. Digitary won an international RFP search, and we announced that back in June. And they have been working with us since that time, and I'll describe quickly a little bit of our context and history. The MyCreds MaCertif National Network is owned by the Association of Registrars of the Universities and Colleges of Canada. I will refer to it as a ROOC in this presentation. The underlying platform is very much owned by Digitary, and so we have an ingenious partnership that we've set up with our service provider, our schools, and with the National Association, which is essentially owned by our schools. So ARUC owns the MyCreds MaCertif National Network, as I said, but the underlying platform, we're very much working with our service partner. So what is it? MyCreds MaCertif, and that's important, we are bilingual in Canada. So Macertif is the French iteration of this. It's a 24/7 virtual or digital credential wallet. Plus, we've tried to create a document and digital exchange highway, and I'll explain some of the reasons for that. It is a shared collaborative service. So our members are the post-secondary institutions themselves, and they voted unanimously at their annual general meetings to decide to do this. And in fact, this is why we were able to do an RFP and the like. With MyCred's Macertif, it provides regional, national, and international connectivity. It supports the entire life cycle of the learner. And so I put some examples, and I'll return to this later in terms of the types of documents and underlying data that are supported. ORUC itself is a not-for-profit, and it's pan-provincial. In Canada, we have 13 provinces and territories and over 200 post-secondary institutions. The diversity is extraordinary, so I often say that our project is a people project first. The technology pieces come along for help us enable what we want to achieve. We also have worked very hard because of that diversity of the 13 provinces and territories to build partnerships with national associations and within each province, regional associations, and some examples are here. We do not have a political scaffolding where we have a national Department of Education. We don't have a European Commission or anything like that. What we have are 22 different ministries of education involved in this space, and every one of them are within one of those 13 provinces and territories. So you can just imagine why I emphasize this as a people project. Our project, in that same vein, is formally endorsed by presidents, colleges, and universities in every province. We have a long history since the 70s, early 70s, with data exchange, and they are called application centers or hubs. They're specific to provinces. They're not in every province, but they are partners in this project. We also have been consulting from day one with students and have formal endorsement from student representative bodies. So I've taken a user design approach, which is basically core to that self-sovereign learner agency concept. We also have credential evaluation organizations that are either already part of or will be part of our network, and government. So you can see there's quite a lot of complexity. We created it for the reasons you see on the left here. I'm not going to get into all of this, but I will tell you that supporting our learners and supporting mobility was a real primary piece for us, but we also are seeing increasing document fraud, and it's becoming an issue, and we needed to address that even though we had aging infrastructure. COVID's been interesting for us because some of our schools it's resulted in them coming to our door faster, for others slower. But it's been essential that we do this to help our schools with resilience and pandemic response. And so we're seeing that this is becoming a linchpin for a lot of the work we're doing. We work very hard to contribute to data standards, interoperability, and partnerships. And we also are applauding our partners such as Digitary and our schools who do so much along with our application centers in various ways and means, and we attempt to contribute as well. In Canada, for example, and I never hear about them in the higher ed space, there's an organization called DIAC that's a standards body that our banks and our governments and other providers are a part of. So we are part of DIAC. We're also part of another organization called the IDEA Lab, the Digital Identity Lab. I sit on their board. It's a formal, federal not-for-profit that's neutral space that provides sandboxing and assessment support to make sure that you are being as interoperable as you need to be. And then there are others here, such as PESC and CanPESC, which is about XML data standards. So we're part of a lot of these groups, or our service partners are, and they're critical. On the right are some of our community-based groups that do other types of standards from a policy point of view that are very critical, and this is a field that I'm very active in. Right now, today, we have 48,000 learners with their own wallets, exchanging 72,000 documents. We are part of a national ecosystem, an international ecosystem of 2 million learners. We have today 12 institutions who are now launched since we launched MyCred's Macertif, In Ontario alone, which is one of our provinces, over 50% of the enrollments for that entire province are represented by either the schools that have launched or soon to launch. We have created a bilingual platform, website, and support. Even our working team is bilingual. We also have created a world that is white labeled for our schools and issuing organizations. And we have lots of communications that we've built out around this project to support our work and to support our learners. To give you an illustrative example of our success, this is a map which we are actually in the process of updating. Our learners, because they can't even come to the country right now in some instances, are going in, getting their Canadian documents from other parts of the world. In addition, and in some instances, they're grabbing them from other parts of the world, but they're from Canadian depositories, but sending them back to other Canadians. That's happening a lot. We also have learners, and this is what this map depicts, sending documents all over the world and data all over the world. So they're 100% in control of their universe. These are just an example of some of the schools that are in various stages of coming on board. What I will say to you is it's our largest. You may have heard of McGill University, for example, or University of Toronto. University of Toronto is the largest institute in Canada. It has 65,000 students, and they are now a receiver on MyCreds. I'm not going to play this video only because we don't have time, but what it depicts, and I've given you the URL, what it depicts is all the different types of data standards that we're working and playing in. And we're very, very excited about the partnership of our service partner with Matter to extend out the wallet further. There's already a proof of concept, but we want to work closely with our schools who are very active in the SSI space to do interesting and innovative things. We want to work not just in the blockchain realm, but even beyond. And so we are already doing tremendous standards-based exchange in other types of standards. There's, the black badging standards, the XML standards, et cetera. And we see this as an important piece for that learner agency and control component. Let me start by saying that there are pieces to our work that really help to focus. We started with principles, but we have practicality here too. We're trying to be agile, interoperable, versatile. We are integrating with our schools as part of the onboarding process and with other issuers and receivers because we need scalability. We have high volume. I mentioned one school at 65,000. We do have some very large institutions here. We also have government coming on board as receivers because there's a huge international focus in Canada. So we're working with immigration authorities, Canadian Border Services, and the like. Innovation is core to our work, and we work closely with our service partner in our community to keep pushing the envelope. And as I said, we only just launched formally in November. We had a proof of concept for 2 schools last summer, but we are rapidly scaling and focusing on the onboarding. And so we do that in a number of ways. So we have videos that our learners have actually created that explain and show what the wallet looks like. And I think what I'll do here is say I'm happy to share those links as a follow-up as well as this deck to assist all of you. But in the interest of time, I'd like to pause and just take questions, if I may.
Thanks, Joanne. Let me kick off with one question or a couple linked questions. One is, for governments or university systems kind of new to this space, how have you managed kind of all of the different standards bodies? How do you kind of manage these networks? How do you participate in these discussions? And do you see some kind of harmonization towards interoperable standards and an agreement on standards, whether they're data standards or wallet standards? And then the other question kind of linked to that is kind of how have you then collaborated kind of outside of Canada with other countries looking at kind of the interoperability and transferability of credentials with your students that, as you showed, are spread throughout the world?
Okay. So let me start with your first question about how do you collaborate with people in Canada? What have we done? What's our secret to our sauce, shall we say? Let me first say for the record that because of the complexity, it's critically important that we have a very robust communications and consultation engagement experience. So we started this in 2014. We first had to build knowledge, then we had to build consensus around principles. Anytime you're dealing with different organizations, that's the first smart thing to do is, can we agree on some shared principles? The next thing that we worked hard to do is make sure we were aligned with some really critical national and regional associations that have resonance within their communities and link us back to the presidents and the policy makers, the decision makers at the highest level, including even in government. So that's where we established and secured formal partnerships to be on steering, to be part of the process of our work. And we continue that, Robert. We don't have, it's not always going to be perfect, and it's not always going to be finished. These types of collaborations and communication and engagement continues. But what I have noticed since 2014 until today is because we got the principles of engagement right, things like a learner focus, respecting the institutional autonomy and authority, respecting and supporting diversity and autonomy of each of our regions, they have saved us in so many places and spaces. And if I can give my highest recommendation, do that. Secondly, how do we collaborate internationally? We see our relationships internationally as so critical. Simone mentioned the Groningen Declaration Network. Quite frankly, that particular community has been so important to our work. It's helped us aspire to higher levels. They've been a community of thought leaders who've helped guide our understanding of the space. They've supported us every step of the way. And in fact, my company, as well as the Rook, and as well as some others in Canada, have become signatories to the GDN principles, which align with our work here. We also have worked very hard for years, even before starting this project, with another international standards body called the Post-Secondary Electronic Standards Council, which is out of the States. We refer to them as PESC. Our community, including our hubs and schools, myself included, I've been a member of PESC for probably 15 years. 20 years, and we have worked diligently as registrars, as experts, thought leaders, etc., in different spaces and places to support that community, because, and we've had some tremendous success where our institutions and our hubs across the country have adopted XML data exchange standards and quite a
Looks like Joanne has frozen. See if she comes back. So Joanne, if you can hear us, your screen has frozen. I was going to ask one more question, and I'll put in the chat to your own ask of this community or challenge that you faced that you think you can overcome. But I'll put that in the chat, and I know you had a tight time schedule, so if you can come back and join us, that would be fantastic. But I'd like to move on to our final use case from Colombia and introduce Roger, who will give a little bit of background on his work, where he works, and some of the challenges he's trying to address. Roger, over to you.
Hi, hello everyone. Let me share my screen with you. Are you looking at the screen? Not yet. Let me try again. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Well, okay, my name is Roger Kirama. I am the CIO of the National Ministry of Education in Colombia. We want to talk about a pilot project around blockchain that we have developed from the past months. So I will show you this agenda for now. I will do a brief explanation about these key concepts here. But let me give you context for all of you. Part of the mission of the Ministry of National Education in Colombia, the MOE.
Hi, sorry about that, folks.
Hi, Joanne. Sorry about that. We've gone on to the next use case with Roger in Colombia, but there are a few questions in the chat. One from Wes and one that I presented. If you want to go ahead and kind of engage in the chat and answer those, and if you can stick around till Roger finishes, we'll have kind of an open session. That would be fantastic. But thanks. It was an awesome presentation, Joanne. Back to you, Roger.
Okay, thank you. So the National Ministry of Education is in charge of the implementation and evaluation of public education policies. The idea is to close the existing gap in terms of guaranteeing the right to education, maintaining a high quality offer. So this requires taking into account the difference between territories to ensure that there is an integral development of both individuals and society itself. So the idea is to close the gap around the country, across the country. So based on this mandate, the MOE, the National Ministry of Education, is the authority that recognizes which higher education institutions are legally authorized to offer educational services in Colombia, and within these institutions, which programs they can offer, they can teach. However, the responsibility of the graduation, I mean the giving the degrees, the certificates, is in the role of the higher education institutions. So the National Ministry of Education has an information system that control and manage all the information in higher education, receiving all the reports from the universities, the higher education institutions. However, it takes around 6 months to report updated data on graduated students, which creates a gap between when the students are graduate and when the data can be consulted in the higher education information system. So different organizations and individuals around the country have the need to consult that the data that the graduates offer them is valid in a period of time much less than those 6 months. So the idea is that we can be faster in having this information updated in the system. So the higher education institution system can offer data to be consulted, but it's not really updated. So the ultimate responsibility of validating of this data is in the role of the higher education institutions, who are the ones authorized to graduate the students. After, of course, meeting the requirements. So each higher education institution may differ in size and resources, which also create differences in what they can offer on digital solutions to the students across the country. So there is no a system in Colombia that allows an articulated or centralized process for issuance of the digital degrees and certificates issued by the higher education institutions authorized by the competent authority that allows the rapid validation, consolidation, and consultation of the data, avoiding somehow uncertainty and falsification. So the challenge is how can Ministry of Education and the higher education institutions provide a solution that they can validate these digital degrees and certificates in a fast and reliable way. So said this, the idea is to consolidate an offer with a secure platform. That's why we decided to use blockchain, understanding that this is possible to do a traceability, immutability, and 100% online. And we decided to use blockchains as an open standard for creating, using, viewing, and verifying blockchain-based certificates. So here we can see the main actors of this pilot and the roles. In one side is the National Ministry of Education, which, as I said before, is the entity in charge of giving the legal status to institutions of higher education and qualifying the registry of programs. And the other side are the universities, the higher education institutions, which are in charge of load and sign the certificates of higher education degrees. I mean, the students, the graduated students, and the systems will send to the graduates the certifications. In the other actor, the graduated students, they can share this information, these credentials, to third parties. For example, for looking for an employee or to make any course overseas, abroad, I mean, a master's degree, for example. So the system will allow this possibility of checking these credentials. These were the main participants in this project. We work with 5 universities, 3 official or public universities, and 2 privates. Of course, the National Ministry of Education, our office, which is the Technical and System Information Office. And we based the solution in an Amazon platform. What we did was the modeling of the process, establishing the agreement, the requirements, work with the higher university institutions, define the reports, and saying that this solution will be a low-cost solution. Then we did an implementation using agile methodologies, compatible with mobile devices based on the standards. In summary, these were the 4 steps of the process. So the institutions allowed the list of the graduate certificates. Institutions sign the certificates. The graduates receive the certificates by email and then can share themselves, and then the third parties can certify these credentials. So these were the main steps that we run in the project. We will continue working with more universities, trying to enhance the project at the same role of the ministry, giving the register of the users, giving the credentials. The institutions will continue loading the certificates for the students, sign, and the system will send the emails to the students. This is the role of the higher education institution, that's to graduate, to offer postgraduate studies for interested employers. And the idea is to as I mentioned, to enhance, to scale the project, to persuade more universities to join to the project, and probably will be covering 100% of the universities with the offer. We are working with other partners like National Ministry of Technology, with Colombia Compra Efficient, which is the contracts institution in Colombia, because they evaluate different process. For example, receiving a lot of curriculum vitaes, and this must be validated around the studies, the programs, the certificates of postgraduate programs, etc. So these are possible interested in this project. We will consider, making this more usable, having more authorized institutions involved in the project, optimizing the functionality of the solution, and will be presented to other, say, higher education counseling, higher education quality system council, and others that can help us to continue with the project. I will stop here.
Thanks very much, Roger. I think it's fascinating kind of from the government's perspective, how you've kind of managed, again, these connections with other public entities, with universities. I wonder if you can share with us maybe one challenge and one thing you've learned from starting this initiative in terms of engaging outside of the Ministry of Education.
Well, one of the challenges was to persuade the universities to be part of the project. So we took about 3 weeks discussing the challenge, establishing the problem, and the next steps to work. So it was an interesting part of the project, just an open discussion. We were very flexible to listening to all the participants, and that's why we clarified very well the challenge, the problem.
Awesome. I'm going to open up the discussion now. So please drop any questions you have for either Joanne, Iwan, or Roger into the link. We've got about, I think, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so for discussions. One question I'd like to address to the group that feeds off of Wes's question is how you're getting feedback from the users and learners themselves. And one of the issues Roger mentioned was that some of the still inherent user interface, user operability, ease of use issues with blockchain technologies and how you've addressed that. So maybe I could go to Joanne first and then to Iwan and then back to Roger. Joanne.
I just wanted first to apologize. I'm having some internet challenges. As a result, I can't see any of the questions in the chat. So if people have other questions that I have not addressed, you could let me know. Our approaches to consultation with the community take multiple forms. We do surveys, we hold convening opportunities. For example, this entire week, we are doing convening opportunities with our community more generally. But we also hold focus user group sessions on a monthly basis, and we do a lot of work with individual schools as they're onboarding.
And what have you learned? What's like one of the biggest takeaways you've had from these sessions? Is it what are the challenges that the users are having?
The biggest challenge is understanding things. It's just knowledge. The other challenge is having the resources and the funding to work on this and the prioritized support from their leadership to do it. It's been a real challenge and continues to be throughout the project.
Okay. And Iwan, how about yourself? How have you dealt with getting user feedback and some of the challenges of students in particular around participating in this network, in the system?
I have to admit that actually we haven't talked much with students apart via their respective university, because we have a consortium of university members. But on the other hand, we conduct, just like Joanne, several sessions that is also open for the students. And the other thing is we are conducting a survey with the job market actually that reflects the requirement from the industry. So then, because we believe one of the initial hypotheses when we developed the credential is the one single paper that says that you are finishing a class of calculus doesn't mean anything. Which part of calculus that you are good at, that's the most important thing. So that's become the reason how we construct the credential, how we construct the metadata, things like that.
Thanks, Iwan. And Roger, you raised this, how to make the system more usable, more intuitive. What have been some of your challenges and any solutions?
Yes, we are trying to improve the solution because we're part of this pilot project. Now, at this time, we are working on making this more usable. Low cost definitely is very important because the resources are very finite. The idea is to move this to cloud exactly. more this scalable, reliable, and of course, standards-based. So we have controlled this working weekly. We are doing meetings with the participants after they understood the importance of the project. So they have been very collaborative. They are very propositive, new ideas. So we are very open with them.
Thanks, Roger. Let me do one more round, and please, if others have questions, I'll integrate them into the discussion. But Joanne, the other question I wanted to ask you and everybody else is kind of what's your ask of this community? What is the challenge that you wake up in the morning thinking, I wish I had people to talk about and how to solve this challenge? This is really bothering me. What is the thing that keeps you up at night or wakes you up in the morning and that you really need some support on?
I really think that the concept of bridging today and tomorrow fits within this question. We have communities that simply aren't ready for jumping on the spaceship. And so, or need to also be using other data standards, other data realities, in addition to being interested in pressing the envelope in this space. And so I would argue that there's a real opportunity to think about the concept, as I call it, horizontal interoperability, not just vertical interoperability. You know, how can you work across data standards bodies to develop out opportunities to connect, to help with connection at that level? I can go further, but I'll leave it at that.
No, I mean, this is a big issue with regard to any institution, but particularly public sector, of legacy systems, legacy data systems, legacy standards. How do you kind of move all of these entrenched interests, which is a huge challenge, and particularly one that we work with constantly with our clients at the bank. Iwan, what's your ask or challenge that you'd like to address?
Well, I agree with Joanne. That's one of the issue because interoperability is always an issue. And one thing that I would like to ask from the community is we are dealing with a relatively new kind of things, right? With new kind of technology. And things are moving very fast. There are initiatives here and there, like Simone already mentioned, for example, there are standards here from the US, from Europe. And I have to admit, we are from the other part of the world, sometimes a bit confused. Who should we follow? And if we can have some kind of, constructive discussion, then okay, we'll go to this part, for example. That's the thing that I think will be useful for us.
Iwan, you're not alone, and that was my first question to Joanne: is how did she make sense of all of these bodies? What are they working on? Where are they going? What is the standards that's emerging? I think it's confusing for most of us. So anything that we can do in that area, Iwan.
Yeah, and if I can add, we are also exploring block sets like Roger, for example, and I have to admit what's next, because it's something like a broken project, right? We do not have a view on the roadmap. So, and there are initiative also in another part of the world. And again, we have to choose at the end of the day, right? Which solution that we want to follow, some kind of technology.
And Roger, I mean, it'd be great to kind of hear what your ask is. And this issue of legacy systems, we did that pilot in Colombia on conditional cash transfer, and Prosperidad Social and Jóvenes en Acción already had established systems and processes and partnerships that kind of moving that ship is very difficult. So what is your ask or challenge you'd like to address, Roger?
Well, every day my challenge is how to move from all these legacy systems to the new ones. But we need to work in parallel with both ideas. So we cannot avoid the legacy from one day to another. So it's the big challenge, moving step by step. And in this case of this blockchain project, we are working just with 5-6 universities. We have to go to 300 universities. So still a lot of work to be done. So we will have a lot of meetings again, but yeah, I think this is like the big challenge we have.
Well, I hope you've met some partners in arms in Joanne and the universities she's working with, and Iwan and the universities he's working with. So I hope the three of you can connect and share some notes after this this session. So let me wrap up these use cases, pass it back to Chris for some final thoughts, and then I'll give 30 seconds on what's coming next. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And, thanks to all the presenters today, and, Joanne, for staying late. I really appreciate it. As we said at the beginning, so digital credentials and identity really sit as the foundational piece for creating a real internet of education in local contexts. And as you can see, there's amazing work happening, and really it doesn't end where this work is happening. This is probably the space with the most thickness. And we encourage you to get involved and start doing your own pilots, start figuring out some of your own pieces. And, this community is very open for being a community of practice. Simone showed some of the principles, not only of self-sovereign identity, but of the internet of education. And at the center of this is a philosophy of decentralization, right? That's learner-centered, and that philosophy extends beyond just how the technology works and how the frameworks will work. It has proven to also be how the culture operates, and so I say that to say, this is a community of support that is ready and active to help you, not only in helping to educate you and bring literacy to why these things matter and how these things work, but to help in launching labs and launching projects and sharing technologies and ideas. So it really is an amazing community, and when you get into it, you're going to see that there is just a real hunger for collaborating and sharing, because that's what this is about. This doesn't really completely come online and completely work until we have a global network where all of our networks are sharing, and because portability is at the key of this, right? The idea here is the learner, the employee, should be able to take their credentials that are theirs into any context, into any location, regardless of their zip code or, regardless of who they are or where they came from. And so this is a really exciting moment. And COVID, while it's been, a disaster around the world, it also acts as a forcing factor, right, for being able to come in and say, we can do this. We did digitalize education in a lot of ways to make sure that we could solve that equity crisis that happened. And now there's a real moment in time for these credential networks to act as a foundation for a new future that will be more equitable in every way. And so it's incredibly exciting. Thanks to everyone. And please, join us. And we'll follow up with some emails with the presentations and different places you can contact if you'd like to get involved. So yeah. So thanks everyone so much.
Thanks, Chris. Just a few final words. Again, thanks to all of our presenters. Fantastic discussion. Thanks to all of you. I think at one point we had almost 90 people on this call, so there's a thirst for this knowledge. Thanks for the guys behind the scene, Dean and Iñaki, who pulled this together with Chris's team at LEF. We'll have a recording and presentations that we'll send out. And our next session will delve deeper into issues of the skills economy in August. So again, thanks everybody. Have a fantastic day and weekend. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you,
all.
Bob. Thank
Thanks,
you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Cheers all.